Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack complex topics and give you the essential insights. Today, we're looking at something really critical, the idea of freedom. Specifically, how Western liberalism sees it versus Islamic thought. And the big question we're tackling is this. By what right does Western thought claim the authority to define global values? What does that mean for freedom itself? It's going to be quite a journey through history, philosophy, current events. We're drawing on some fascinating sources, particularly from Dr. Naif bin Nahar from Qatar. To kick us off, one source mentions the French political scientist Olivier Roy, who, well, basically says only the West gets to determine values. That's quite a statement, and it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is the moral decline some people see in the West linked to its specific take on freedom?
That's exactly the starting point. Our sources suggest this decline isn't just random. It's framed as a consequence, a result of a deeper fall, at the level of human nature or instinct. Fitra, they call it. So while maybe some ethics like justice stick around, the actual logic behind ethical thinking, that's what's seen as having deteriorated. That's the ground we need to cover.
Right. So how did the West reach this point, thinking it could define morality not just for itself, but maybe for everyone? If we go way back. Ancient Greece, Rome.
Yeah, back then, the sources show a kind of balance. You had reason and you had religious authority, both carrying significant weight. It wasn't one dominating the other, not entirely.
Okay, a balance. But then came the Middle Ages, a huge period, over 10 centuries.
And a massive shift. The West became almost completely defined by religious authority during that time. Scientific, rational inquiry, largely pushed to the side. You had exceptions, sure, like Thomas Aquinas, individuals here and there, but the general atmosphere, overwhelmingly religious control.
So a long stretch of religious dominance. Then the Renaissance starts, and reason begins to creep back in.
Slowly, yes. Thinkers like Martin Luther, early Enlightenment figures. Reason was emerging, definitely. But, and this is key, it was alongside a still respected religious authority. They weren't trying to just, tear religion down yet.
But it had issues with the structure, maybe, but not faith itself.
Exactly. David Hume pointed this out. People had problems with clerics, with the church hierarchy, but not necessarily with religion as a concept. Philosophers like Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau. They were mainly pushing back against the clergy's control over texts, over secular life, not faith itself. Spinoza even suggested civil authorities should interpret religion, not the priests.
Interesting. So still some coexistence, maybe uneasy, but what was the big break then? The point of no return?
The French Revolution. Our sources really highlight this. It marked a direct turn against religion itself. Tocqueville even noted this was a result of the revolution, not its cause. A fundamental shift in attitude.
Then with religion pushed aside?
Reason logically stepped in. It became the new guide. But here's the immediate problem. Reason is individual, isn't it? My reason, your reason. They might not agree. There's no single reason to govern everyone.
Okay, so individual reason is the new authority, but it's fragmented. How did they try to manage that collectively? What was the first big idea?
Democracy. That was the first attempt. The thinking was, okay, let's aggregate all these individual reasons. Majority rule. If most people's reason points one way, that's the way we go.
Simple enough. Did it work? Problem solved.
Well, no, not quite. The sources show democracy alone wasn't the fix. World War II made that painfully clear. You had Hitler, Mussolini, totalitarian regimes rising up to democratic means initially. It showed that the majority could still brutally oppress minorities. So democracy on its own was insufficient.
Okay, so democracy wasn't the complete answer. Back to the drawing board.
Exactly. Which leads to the second major attempt, liberalism. Its roots go back to Locke, sure, but it was really developed by people like John Stuart Mill. The core idea was to protect individuals, protect minorities from the potential tyranny of the majority. And it gets summed up in that famous phrase, you are free as long as you don't harm others.
Which sounds good on the surface.
And this whole journey leads us to Francis Fukuyama, remember his end of history idea. The West felt that it finally cracked it. Political democracy plus social and economic liberalism, capitalism. This combination was seen as the ultimate, maybe the final form of human governance.
Right, the supposed endpoint. But let's unpack that liberal phrase. You are free as long as you don't harm others. Our sources call this a deception. Why? What are the obvious questions?
The immediate questions jump right out. Who gets to define harm? And just as importantly, who counts as others? And that's the first big flaw. If the majority defines harm, haven't you just brought back the very tyranny liberalism was supposed to prevent?
Can you give an example?
Look at France banning the hijab in official institutions. The argument isn't really that the hijab physically harms the majority. is it? Yet the majority's preference dictates the rule. It shows that contradiction right there.
And this idea of others, it's not static, is it? The sources say it keeps expanding.
In really surprising ways. First, they mention children. The definition expands so that children can make huge life-altering decisions, like gender transition, sometimes against their parents' wishes. The parents don't count as the others being harmed in that view.
A second example.
Animals. It sounds maybe far-fetched now, but the sources raise the possibility. What if animal rights groups become a powerful majority? Could they argue meat consumption harms animals, the others, and ban it? It shows how fluid these definitions are.
So liberalism, designed to protect minorities.
Ironically, can become a tool for minorities to exert control over majorities. Think about the LGBTQ+ community, for example. A minority group, yes, but with significant influence, media power, to the point where academics might feel, afraid to voice critical perspectives on things like gender fluidity, a minority shaping the discourse for the majority. Strange reversal.
That's a really interesting point, and it connects to this key distinction. In the West, freedom becomes the ultimate goal, the reference. But in Islamic thought,
it's fundamentally seen as a means, a tool to achieve something greater, like justice, not the end goal itself.
Which leads to another argument from the sources.
That the West has sort of slid, maybe without realizing it, from the age of reason into the age of desire. Reason battled religion for centuries, but desire seems to have, maybe overthrown reason much faster, perhaps in just a century. The demand now is often just, accept me as I am. It's desire triumphing over rational debate.
Okay. Now, just briefly, what about secularism, Almania? Is it automatically linked to freedom?
Not at all. The sources are clear on this. You can have very authoritarian secular states. Think Syria or Iraq under Saddam. Secularism doesn't guarantee freedom.
And secularism itself isn't monolithic, right? There are different types.
Exactly. And these terms get mixed up. The most basic is Almania, separating the clergy, their religious authority, from political power. That's mostly a historical issue now, post-French Revolution, though maybe modern Iran is an exception, with the supreme leader role. Then there's Kokania, separating religion itself from political authority. Laws come only from human sources. And then you have the specific French model, laïcité. That goes further, separating religion from the public sphere, from state institutions. No visible religious symbols in certain places, like specific clothing.
But even France, is it sticking purely to laïcité now?
The sources suggest maybe not entirely. There's a sense it's shifting towards defending a specific French identity, often seen as white, Christian against Islam. Think about the fuss over Messi wearing a bisht at the World Cup. It wasn't just about secularism. It felt like a defense of a certain cultural norm. It points towards assimilation, not real multiculturalism.
Which reveals a kind of hypocrisy.
Definitely. The West often pushes for cultural diversity elsewhere, like demanding representation in Afghanistan when it suits their interests. But when diversity challenges their own cultural identity, it's often rejected. Look at Sweden imposing Swedish values on immigrants, even getting involved in parenting based on cultural differences. It shows a clear double standard.
Okay, let's shift gears. Our sources talk about 3 major blows to the West's credibility on universal values. What was the first?
The Russia-Ukraine war. This was really telling. The way Western discourse framed it, focusing on shared identity, white people like us, blue eyes, blonde hair, it starkly revealed a gap between the idea of universal human values and the reality of Western identity. It felt like the first big moment the West retreated back into its own civilizational shell, undermining its claims to speak for everyone.
A retreat to identity. And the second blow?
The World Cup in Qatar. This exposed something else, a deep-seated, maybe even racism or at least cultural bias against Arab and Islamic culture. Again, the reaction to Messi wearing the bish was a prime example, just pure outrage in many Western media outlets. Our sources see this as a wake-up call for Muslim nations, a prompt to stop just importing best practices from the West, especially now that things like university rankings might factor in stances on LGBTQ+ issues and instead develop their own models based on their own needs and identity.
And the third blow, possibly the most damaging.
The Gaza war. This has been devastating for Western credibility, particularly the U.S. You have the self-proclaimed champion of human rights directly supporting actions leading to massive civilian casualties, a humanitarian crisis affecting women and children profoundly, while refusing to call for a ceasefire. How can the U.S. then credibly criticize, say, the Taliban on women's education while enabling the suffering of women in Gaza? The hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore. It just dismantles that moral authority.
So If the West's path shows that abandoning a transcendent moral reference leads to this kind of moral fluidity and decline, what's the takeaway for Muslim societies?
It's a huge cautionary tale. The argument in our sources is that despite political problems in many Muslim countries, the societal commitment to Islamic values often remains strong. And that commitment acts as a kind of bulwark, a barrier against the sort of moral collapse seen elsewhere. If that societal commitment weakens, the risks increase.
And the Quran itself offers a framework for understanding this decline, like a blueprint.
Yes, almost like Satan's project, as the sources put it. It's quite remarkable how the Quran outlines these stages. Phase 1 is idlah, misguidance, just getting people off the right path. Phase 2, amani, false hopes, replacing true purpose with shiny but ultimately empty goals, like thinking the Enlightenment or science or reason alone is the ultimate answer, separate from God. We saw ideologies based on that collapse, like the Soviet Union. Phase 3, amin, command or submission, moving from suggesting things to demanding absolute obedience. Individuals become subservient. The sources connect this even to things like the push for childhood gender transitions, seeing it as a kind of irrational submission, almost like worship through obedience.
And the final stage.
Phase 4, Takir Kaltullah, changing Allah's creation. This is presented as the climax, and it's directly linked to what we see today. The Quran explicitly states Allah created you male and female.
No.
The modern drive for gender reassignment directly contradicts this. The argument is that the full meaning of this specific verse is only becoming crystal clear right now. It feels quite prophetic.
That's a very powerful framework. So let's contrast this again with the Islamic idea of freedom. It's not just do what you want if no one gets hurt.
No, that Western definition is seen as fundamentally flawed. It's subjective, what one person calls freedom, another calls depravity, like prostitution. And it's relative. Philosophical definitions often struggle because they tie freedom just to human will, which can choose good or evil.
So what is the Islamic definition proposed?
It's defined as the exercise of one's rights based on justice. This shift is profound. It makes freedom itself a value because it immediately implies two parties, someone with a right and someone with an obligation to respect that right, and the foundation connecting them. Justice. Freedom is inseparable from justice.
How does that apply to things like the World Cup LGBTQ plus demands or feminism in Muslim contexts?
Well, from this perspective, Western demands for rights often ignore the justice question. They assert their cultural rights as universal, bypassing the need to establish the justice of that claim in a different cultural context. Who defines the right? Based on what principle of justice? Similarly, for feminism in Muslim societies, the argument is that framing women's rights purely in terms of Western freedom might be less effective than grounding them in justice, which requires considering the rights and obligations of all parties involved within an Islamic framework.
And justice is perhaps more universal?
Arguably, yes. Justice is a concept most cultures and philosophies engage with seriously. You can rationally argue for the justice behind Quranic rules on inheritance, finance, even warfare, in a way that might resonate more widely than simply asserting freedom. Islam's clear text provide a reference point for those tough issues where vague appeals to humanity or reason fall short, like the French school bans or cultural clashes.
And this leads to an even deeper idea. Freedom is a condition for true monotheism, tawhid.
Absolutely fundamental. La ilaha illallah, no God but Allah, isn't just an affirmation. It's a liberation, freedom from everything else, not just stone idols, but freedom from our own desires, from money's power, from unquestioning obedience to human authority. The Quran even warns most of them do not believe in Allah except while associating partners with Him, meaning you can believe in God but still be subtly enslaved, giving ultimate allegiance to other things, career, status, ideology. That's shirk. This idea of al-Hanafiya, exemplified by Prophet Abraham, this turning away from everything false before affirming the true God, it highlights that freedom from is necessary for freedom to worship correctly.
So the scope of freedom in Islam is much broader than in liberalism.
Much broader and much deeper. Liberalism focuses mainly on external freedom, from government coercion, from material constraint. Islamic freedom is intensely focused on internal liberation, freedom of feelings, learning to fear only Allah, hope only in Allah. Think of the Ghazan children we mentioned, their incredible resilience, that lack of fear in the face of horror. That's a sign of profound internal freedom. And freedom from the self, the nafs, and its base desires, shahwat. Freedom from ego, greed, envy, lust. Contrast that with liberalism tolerating even self-degradation, like people identifying as animals. Islam sees that as slavery to the lowest desires. Freedom in Islam isn't just doing anything, it's about elevating oneself, and it has a purpose, establishing justice. The Quran says humanity was given guidance that humanity may uphold justice. That's the goal freedom serves.
Okay, but what about enjoining good and forbidding evil? Amr bil maruf wa nahy anil munkar. Isn't that a restriction on freedom? People often see it that way.
That's a common misunderstanding. We need to distinguish between different types of freedom here. There's freedom of obligation, taklif. Humans are obligated by God to believe, to follow divine law. There's no freedom from that divine command, but there is absolute freedom of compliance in Tithal. You are completely free to obey or disobey. God gave free will. The prophet's job was to deliver the message, not force belief. And there's also freedom of action, suluk, which is generally permitted as long as it doesn't harm public order.
So Amr bil maruf isn't about forcing people.
It's not about compulsion at the individual level of belief. It's more a societal mechanism to encourage good and discourage public bad, maintaining a shared moral fabric. Contrast that with the extreme individualism in the West, the mind-your-own-business culture. It sounds like freedom, but can lead to social breakdown, like the bystander effect, where no one helps someone in trouble because it's not their problem. Islam emphasizes shared responsibility for the community's moral health.
Which connects to the idea that the West might lack real ethical thought, now making judgments but struggling to justify the why.
Right. Exactly. And freedom itself doesn't create morality. It just reveals what's already there in a society. So if you don't have a strong external moral reference point like Islam provides, then granting freedom might just unleash chaos or undesirable behavior. You need a foundation. And this actually leads to a call within the sources for renewal within Islamic thought itself regarding freedom, acknowledging that, yes, some historical interpretations by respected scholars might seem problematic today, like viewing marriage as akin to slavery, which completely contradicts the Quran describing marriage as bringing tranquility. The point is, Muslims need to critically engage with these interpretations, using the Quran and Sunnah as the ultimate guide, without being afraid to question, to present a strong, coherent Islamic vision of freedom for today.
Okay, but here comes the inevitable critique. How can you criticize Western freedom when many in the Arab world lack even basic rights like free speech?
Yeah.
It's a valid point people raise.
It is. And the sources offer a clear response. The critique of Western freedom isn't coming from the reality of current Arab states. It's coming from an Islamic framework, which does value freedom deeply. The crucial point is that the current situation in many Arab countries is not a reflection of Islamic principles. No Arab state today is truly governed by Islam.
Can you give an example of an Islamic principle of governance that's different?
Shura, consultation. That's the Quranic model. It's very different from Western democracy. Shura has built-in moral conditions those consulted must be knowledgeable, trustworthy, honest. Democracy's indicators are often just procedural or defined externally by Western bodies. In Islam, political freedom isn't just voting for self-interest. It includes the divine obligation to choose the best, most qualified candidate and to hold leaders accountable truthfully. It's a moral duty, not just a pragmatic choice.
We've covered so much ground. It's clear there are profound differences in how freedom is understood, and the West's journey has led to some deep contradictions.
And maybe the final thought for you listening is this. Freedom is powerful, yes, but it acts like a mirror. It just reflects the character of the society that holds it. Without a strong, transcendent moral compass, what gets reflected back might be quite disturbing. So the challenge, particularly for Muslim societies, isn't necessarily to fear freedom, but to ensure it's guided by an authentic, robust, and critically examined Islamic framework rooted in justice.
Really makes you think about what values underpin our societies and where our ideas about freedom truly come from. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.